Well, thanks, ladies, for being here. Thank you to those of you who are joining us on this webinar. This is put on by Westtown Youth for Christ, and Westtown YFC works with young people in the Kitsap and North Mason communities through after-school programs, working in the juvenile justice system, and mentoring pregnant and parenting teen moms and dads. So our program's open to anybody in the community, and as are these webinars. So this is just a new outreach that we're doing in response to the COVID-19 crisis that our kids are facing and we're facing as parents. So thank you for joining us. On this panel, we have Kimberly Riley and Sara Yarbrough. I'm going to let them introduce themselves quickly here. So we'll start with Sara this time.
Good evening, I'm Sara. I currently live in Spokane. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I specialize helping moms and dads have good relationships and then helping them with parenting. I am a mom of a blended family with 7 kids, and I have 3 at home that are educating themselves presently. So I feel your pain.
Sweet. And Kim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kimberly. I'm also a marriage and family therapist, and I'm in Bremerton. I'm from Bremerton. This is where I grew up. I have 3 girls that are teenagers also at home. And I currently work mostly with adults and families, but my passion is kids, and that's where I spent most of my time interning and a little bit of time after my internship ended.
Cool. Thank you. And my name is Phil Daubenspeck, and I am the Executive Director at Westtown Youth for Christ, dad to 3 daughters. And so they're also, well, one of them has graduated, but she's been spending a lot of time here. And then the other 2 are still in high school, middle school. So we're all in this together. Hopefully many of you watching this webinar were with us on Monday, and tonight our hope is just to answer some of the questions that came in on Monday, but I think we'll also probably have some time to take some questions here at the end as well. So if you have questions, you can pop them in that question and answer box down at the bottom of your screen. Just type it in there, and then we will be able to respond to those. We can see those as you type them in. So feel free to do that at any time, or in the chat box, you can also chat. So if we're responding to something and you have a question or want to say something about that, you can throw it in the chat box. We can see that as well. So the first question that we wanted to start with, that I thought would be good to start with, because we talked a lot on Monday about coping and how to cope. And one question that came up was, what do you do if your coping mechanisms are not available that you typically use? So, ladies, help us out.
I'll address from the parents' perspective, and maybe Kim, you can talk a little bit with kids, but when I talk with other parents, sometimes their coping skills are leaving the house, going shopping, spending time with their friends, maybe even going to the gym, and those are not available, and they're finding that their coping skills have become maybe drinking more alcohol, sleeping more, watching more TV, and they're not finding those are working. I would also echo that those probably are not your best coping skills. This is a great time for you to start experimenting with coping skills, finding new ones that you do have access to. And I use the better, same, worse sort of measurement. So let's say you're really struggling with the way that people are breathing in your house right now, or chewing in your house. Those are things I keep hearing from frustrated parents. They're breathing too loud. Then when you do something to help cope with that, do you feel better? Do you feel the same, or do you feel worse? And if you feel the same or worse, try something different. But this is a process of trying to figure out what's going to work. because you just don't know what's going to work, and everybody's a little bit different. But if you don't feel better when you use a coping mechanism, do something different. Don't keep doing the same one over and over and over. That's not going to work for anybody. So when you find yourself getting really, really frustrated, try something new and then measure it. Do I feel better? Do that more.
Yeah, so I think, like Sarah was saying, speak from the kids' perspective. So I feel like a lot of kids are still learning what their coping skills are to begin with. So now they're at home and they didn't know how to name what they were doing before to cope, but now they're a little grumpy. And so you're like, what's the problem? And something's missing from their life. And that's when you get curious around, what is it? Like, what do you usually do in your day? So kids are used to being able to get up and have some sort of routine, and go to school and then be at school with their friends and teachers and then come home, have a snack, all those different things, right? And so in there somewhere is their ability to cope. So now that they're home, I encourage people to try to let their kids have some level of routine. Because although maybe that doesn't look like coping skills, but it is, because this is so unfamiliar to them. So when we don't have our natural ways of coping that we usually use, we have to create that in our space. So if a child's way of coping with getting up in the morning is watching TV or something, I don't know, or sitting down and eating breakfast before they leave the house, and that's been disrupted, then allow them to do that kind of on the schedule that you're on now, so that they can begin their day feeling like something is the same. So you maybe wouldn't call that coping, but it actually is coping, right? With just being at home, doing something that is naturally there. Other things like going outside. So I hear a lot of people where the new thing that opened in Kitsap County was Defy, the little jump in place. And that was a space where people could kind of take their kids to get some energy out if they had been in the house all week. That's not some place to go. Like, there's nowhere to go. So again, creating something in your home that feels a little bit like that, finding a safe place where they can jump around, maybe even letting them go outside, and jump around, socially distancing from other kids, but in their own space. So just be creative with what you already know works, but at home. So taking what worked out in the public or what you usually do, getting creative and finding how to do that at your house.
Yeah. Maybe even like with that, if you had like some rules like, hey, we don't jump in the house, or we don't do this, might be a time that, hey, within these parameters, we get to jump in the house now because this is a different time, and being able to change those things can be helpful too, I think. That's great. Next question. This is a good one, because we're all trying to figure out school with kids at home. So this question said, can you touch on resistance around schoolwork? That is a daily battle in our house, sometimes dragging on for hours beyond the time it should take. Yeah, I think sometimes, school for young, for like middle schoolers, they're saying like 20 minutes per class. So if a kid doesn't want to do it, it's really easy to argue for 20 minutes about them doing that schoolwork, for sure. So I can hear this question loud and clear. So what do you guys think about that? How do we work through that?
So I've been talking with a lot of parents who are teachers. So and what the teachers keep telling me over and over is to just relax. This is what they do. They understand, and they're taking responsibility for kids. They want parents to be involved and engaged and encouraging. But teachers are now going to be contacting kids in a variety of ways. They're going to be contacting families in a variety of ways. And the teachers are really we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, they're going to figure out a rhythm to talking with your kids and encouraging your kids to turn things in. But all kids are in the same boat. And I want to talk a little bit about this issue of homeschool, because I have been a homeschool parent before. This is not homeschool. And this is crisis schooling, and our job is to really love our kids and to keep them safe and to encourage them and find ways to help them just move forward a little bit. But we don't have to take responsibility for their schooling. We don't have to make sure that they do their schooling. And if you find that you're in a power struggle over whether to get the math done or not, you're in the wrong power struggle. You need to back up and just love your kid. They're freaking out, they're tired, they haven't engaged their good problem solver. And just this week, one of my junior high kids was under the kitchen table crying that their teacher was totally unfair and it was an unsolvable problem, right? And we all know it's not unsolvable and it's not unfair, but his problem solver had gone offline. His brain wasn't working. So he went and did something that he loved to do. And then he was able to ask a question that helped him get over his hurdle. But fighting about that is not going to end well for you or your kids. So I would encourage you to relax on the school and love them well. And the great question is what do you want to do about that? What do you need to do about that? What tools do you have access to? And let the teachers solve those problems as they're emailing them, as they're texting their teachers, as they're Zooming their teachers, or whatever platform your teachers are using, because teachers are stepping up their game, but it's new for the teachers and it's new for the kids. So I would stay away from the power struggle altogether, find something they like to do and do that.
Mm-hmm. I think with that, in between all of that, so all those things that we're trying to do with our kids at home, it's important to take breaks. So parents need breaks, kids need breaks, we all need breaks. So, really incorporating that into the day. And the break can be, depending on your child and how hard it is to get them to come back. So breaks can be scary because you think, oh, if I give a break, it's going to be difficult bringing them back. But again, this is all part of routine. And again, this goes back to coping. So you kind of adapt to what you need to adapt to. So starting now, we're still in the beginning stages of doing some of this homework with our kids at home. Starting now with the breaks, I think in a couple weeks, they'll get it. They'll say, okay, that's right. I've done 30 minutes of work. And so now mom and dad get a break for 15 minutes. And now I get a break for 15 minutes. And I'm going to do something I enjoy in that time. And then we're going to come back together. So simply just giving yourself a break, giving your kids a break is going to be a lot of help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I've been learning is that trying to balance everybody's expectations, right? So like, what are my expectations of my kids for their schoolwork? What's their own expectations of their schoolwork? What are the teachers' expectations of their schoolwork? And when you're talking middle and high school kids, they've got 6-ish teachers, all with different lesson plans and stuff that they're trying to work on. And I think for me, it's just been like, okay, what do you have to do? And what do you have to do today? Like, not trying to build in the procrastination, but also the realisticness of like, it might be easier for you to do that project all in one day in math and to do this project all in one day in science. And I'm totally okay with that. Learning how to be flexible for them. A lot of, at least in our district, it seems like for middle and high school, a lot of the projects are turning into they're assigning stuff Monday, it's due Thursday or Friday. And so it's easier to do that. But again, that depends on the teacher and what they're doing. So I think it's figuring out like, what's required, that you got to make sure your kid is doing that. We're going to have a webinar on Monday with educators. We've got a couple of teachers, we've got a couple of school counselors. They're going to be able to speak to this a little bit more as to like, what's the best way to communicate with those teachers, and what are the expectations, and the expectations your kids are feeling are probably still from being in the classroom, and probably, I don't know this for sure, but my assumption is that those expectations have changed now that they're at home. And so, how do we communicate that to our kids and let them know that? And I think that's going to be really important. So Monday, shameless plug, Monday, you're going to want to jump in to hear those educators talk about that and share kind of their side. Because like you said, Sarah, they are diving in. They're neck deep in this, trying to figure it out for themselves right now. So we're all learning this as we go. That's great feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Is there such a thing as too much screen time during quarantine for kids? It's a great question.
I guess I'll go first.
Okay.
I when I heard that question, I thought, wow, I think of emotional levels, right? So like, I remember back in the 90s when Nintendo was like a big deal, and my cousin and I would play, and he'd get off the game and he'd kind of have like an emotional breakdown. And I'm thinking that was probably too much. So if some of our kids right now, if they're emotionally overloaded and they're responding emotionally to that device, then that's probably too much, right? I mean, we all know our kids, I think, but you can also tell when it's overboard. And so if they're responding more to that emotionally than to the people that are like live with them in the house, then, again, that's another, indicator that like, we need to probably bring it back a little bit. I think everybody has rules, and we talked about this a little bit on Monday. Everybody has rules already that are established around technology. So it's a really touchy subject, I think, for people. But I just really feel like that when your child is more engaged emotionally with their device than they are with the humans in the home, that's probably a little bit too much.
Mm. My thought is when a parent asks me, is there such a thing as too much screen time? They've already decided there's too much screen time in their house and they need to dial it back. So parents that aren't concerned about it are asking that question. If you feel like your kid's having too much screen time, you should pay attention to that and start dialing it back. But we talked about on Monday, if you just try to change the rules or take it away in a punishment, it's probably not going to go well. But finding the things that you would like to see instead of your kid being buried in a screen, what do you want to see your kid doing, and then start encouraging toward that behavior. I was talking with a teacher who teaches younger elementary, and she said that she encouraged in her class, they only do a half an hour screen time per day, no more, because they want their brains to develop outside of a screen. And I just thought, our kids at home are getting way more than that every day. In the ideal world, our kids wouldn't be in the screen at all. Their brains would be developing without screens, but that's not our reality. That's not the world we live in, and that's not the world our kids grow up in. So as a parent, you have to decide what is it that you do want to see. And when I work with parents about screen time, I talk more about the behaviors they want to see and then moving toward the behaviors they want to see. So sometimes we have to use screens because we're working and our kids need to be out of our space so that we can get stuff done. And that's a tool we're using right now. It's not the ideal long-term solution. But other times we want to engage our kids and we want them to have great relationships with us, and they don't know how because they've spent all day in a screen. So then it's figuring out, how do I have conversations with my kids without a screen? So when a parent asks, is there too much screen time? The answer already is answered. Yes, there is way too much happening. Across the board, everybody's spending way too much time in front of the screen, but focus on the behaviors you do want to see and then move in that direction.
Yeah. There's a screen going in my background right now with my kids watching it while I'm in here doing this. So
Mine too.
There are lots of screens happening. All right, so boundaries. Monday we talked quite a bit about boundaries on Monday. I think that and coping skills were a couple of the biggest things that we talked about. And a question that came in around that was what are some ways that we might set a boundary in a small space with several people? So maybe like a small house or apartment or something where there's, if you're only in there for a few hours a day together, it's fine. But if you're in there 24 hours a day together, it's tight and tough. So what would you guys maybe say to give some ideas around that?
Well, so when we think about like humans, right, and we're all in these spaces with each other. And I think Sarah said something about people even thinking about like chewing and sounds, and so there's stuff that comes up in small spaces just in general. But when we have all these other emotions and restrictions, it makes it a little bit more tough. So if you're in a small space and you want to create a boundary with the people around you, I think the first thing is to be kind, right? So kindly say, hey, you know what? It's really difficult for me to be in this same space with you and read when you are blasting your music. Can you put headphones in, right? So maybe, everybody have a quiet hour, or the hour's too long, quiet 30 minutes. And that just is incorporated in the day in that small space. As you said, maybe it's a 2-bedroom apartment, maybe it's a 1-bedroom apartment and it's a small family, but it's just too many people. Whatever it is, quietness is always helpful. Something else too is if you can go outside, right? So maybe sitting on the porch or something, or I said this on Monday, sitting in the car, adults sitting in the car, going outside, sitting in the car, maybe for a little bit, while a child and another adult is inside, or an older sibling and a child are inside. I just think we have to, again, go back into this creative mindset. But kindness, I know for a fact, if you are rude about the space that you're sharing, nobody feels good about that. So start with kindness, and then start with quietness, and then start with creating space in other areas.
Mm-hmm. A couple of years ago, I had about 200 square feet of living space for 4 months with my children, and we were living in a country that didn't speak English, and so there was nobody else to talk to. It feels very similar to what we're experiencing now, except we could go to restaurants. That was the thing. And we had to figure out how to live in that space, how to use the bathroom in that space, how to cook in that space. We had to do all of that stuff in that space. And what I found is that setting up a flexible rhythm to the day helped a ton with helping people feel like it's predictable. Everybody had their little zone in which to sit and do their schoolwork, but they could all see each other, they could hear each other. There was no privacy whatsoever, but everybody had their zone. So this kid sat in this chair, this kid sat in this corner, this kid sat outside the bathroom, whatever it was. And then the other thing that we discovered is choosing to see it as this is a short term, this isn't forever. That time in our life was such a unique, bonding, memorable time that we look back on now. And there were moments when I was crying, for sure. It was lonely, it was hard. I needed 4 minutes to use the bathroom without somebody banging on the door. Like I was overwhelmed, and I was really lonely. And I was in a different time zone than the rest of the world. But that was such a sweet period of time because we developed memories that we wouldn't have developed when everybody had their own space, when you can close the door, turn on your own screen, whatever it was. We also used the outdoors park system a lot. We walked to parks and we hung out in parks and read books in parks because the air got stale in that tiny room. There was just and it was months and months and months. And so this can be so much of when you deal with a crisis, when you deal with something that's very difficult, perspective is key. This is such a great time to really get to know your kids and to hone in on some character development. This is such a great time to develop unique memories that you are not going to be able to do shuttling them to soccer and to gymnastics and to after school stuff. This is just such a great time if you can change your perspective from I can't do stuff to I get to sit still with my kids and help them solve math when I didn't have time or energy to do that before. I get to listen to them. We get to read a bedtime story, even though my kids are high schoolers, right? Don't tell them I said that. We get to spend time together and develop memories. And I think that's the key that's not a boundaries issue. That's a perspective shift. That this is a gift. This time is a gift if we choose to see it that way. Yes, there are stressors. Yes, it's really hard. Yes, it feels limiting and feels out of control, all of those things. But we could not create this break in life on our own without all these external factors. So we get to reevaluate, who are we as a family? How are we going to function? What are our values and priorities? How can I help my kid live that out in the best way possible? This is a gift. It's a gift, and small spaces amplify that. And we see that when we take kids to camp, or when we go on vacation, or any of those things. Memories are created in small spaces.
Yeah.
It's a gift.
Yeah. I think sometimes when I hear people talk about like boundaries and stuff like this, I think what comes to my mind is that it's maybe considered a boundary, but it's really that alone time. Like we all need, like, it's great to be with people, but we also just need time alone, just quiet. So I think if you've got smaller kids, that's tougher. But if you've got, middle and high school kids and you need to go out on a walk as a parent, great. Or you need to send your kids out on a walk, great. One of my kids tonight was like, I'm going for a walk. And I was like, thank you. I'm so glad that you're making that choice to do that, on your own. But she needed fresh air and to breathe a little bit. So yeah, go for a walk. That's a great thing. I did it. I was in meetings all morning and did the same thing. Like, just going to go walk the neighborhood, and wave at people from their windows. But I think it's that, that space of just creating space to not all be in one big group, but smaller. If you've got multiple kids, like for me, multiple kids, we typically do date nights, where I'm going out just with one or the other, and this has made that hard, but trying to figure out, hey, how do I take a kid out on a drive, just so it's just me and that one kid out there versus all of us together all of the time, so I think little things like that can help with those boundaries too. This one I thought was a great question. What are your top 5 open-ended questions that you ask teenagers?
My favorite all-time to-go-to question is high and low of the day, best and worst parts of your day. What that question does is it allows a kid to define what makes something good and what makes something hard. It will give you a benchmark of their day. And then you can open up conversation. Why was that hard? Why was that easy? What do you want to see tomorrow? But that is my all-time favorite question with teenagers. And it doesn't really even matter how they answer it, but it gives you to, instead of just getting all negative, if your kid's a negative kid, or right from them, the high and the low. That's my favorite.
I think one of my favorites is just asking, so what do you think? Or like, what are you thinking? I apply that to everything. So if we're watching something, so what did you think about that? So, I see them sitting quietly. So what are you thinking about? I'm always asking people that, like, what are you thinking? Because then it is kind of open-ended. It gives them the chance to say something, right? Like, and even if they say, I don't know, because I think children sometimes will say that. And so then I'll say, well, what do you think? Like, what do you think right now? If you don't really know, what are you thinking? Because you don't have to know. So that's one of my favorite questions to ask kids and adults is like, what do you think about that? Or what are you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For me, when a kid is when they're struggling with something, trying to make decisions, especially as kids get bigger, juniors, seniors in high school, my college kids, and they have issues, instead of telling them or asking a yes or no question, what do you need right now? Or what do you need from me right now? And they may not be able to answer the question what they need, but it gets them from the problem story to a solution story, right? You got to move them from a problem to what could be a solution. And it doesn't have to even be a clear answer, but gets their brain moving because they can get stuck in that negative problem, like doing homework. I can't do it. I don't know what to do. What do you need? What do you need from me? And sometimes they need a sandwich, and they could say, I just need something to eat, or But that is, what do you need or what do you need from me, are two of the greatest questions that I ask bigger kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, from there too, so it's kind of spinning off of the what do you need, where do you want to go? So I like that question too, because it doesn't have to be physically, like, it's just, where do you want to go right now? Like, where do you want to go? Do you want to continue this conversation? Do you not want to talk at all? Do you want to go to bed? You want to go outside? You want to go to your friend's house? Like, whatever, there's an answer, because again, that's not a yes or no. It's like, where do you want to go? Like, and that kind of is like, what do you want to do? Because I feel like kids are not asked that often either. A lot of times we're telling them, so you're going to go do this, and we don't really give them the chance to, that's when they say no. So then you're like, oh shoot, I probably should have asked them or gave them some type of option that didn't allow the answer no. So it's one of my favorites too, is like, where do you want to go? Like, where are you going with this?
Mm-hmm.
I think that something that I've begun to do is when I'm listening to somebody. So first of all, I would say, in order to ask good questions, you need to also be able to listen. So you have to practice. Like, it's great to ask these, like, what are your top 5 questions? But if you're not good at listening, then the best questions don't really work. So I would preface all of this with saying that. But if you can listen to what somebody's saying, you might say, that what you just shared brought up a lot of emotion for you. What are you feeling right now? Because just kind of like what you said, Kim, I think is that sometimes we tell them what they're feeling, or we don't give them an option. So while they may be saying something and they may be angry, what they actually may be feeling is sadness or hurt or pain, right? But how they're expressing it to us, we would think that's something completely different. So I think that brought up a lot of emotion. We're not naming the emotion, but then ask, like, hey, what are you feeling? And make them verbalize. Well, you can't make them, but ask them to verbalize, what's actually they're feeling inside. I think is a great question you could ask too.
Mm-hmm.
Any other suggestions on questions? I always like to say, you mentioned whatever they mentioned. Tell me more. Just tell me more. Tell me more about this. You're in the middle. It's, again, you have to be listening to be able to repeat back to them what they've said to you. But tell me more about this boundary that you had a question about, or tell me more about whatever. And then just sit and listen.
Mm-hmm.
There.
Going back to resistance about schoolwork or boundaries or whatever, I like to ask kids, whether they're clients or my own kids, what are you hoping to get done today? What are you hoping to accomplish today? That could backfire if you have a kid that's like, I'm going to stay in bed all day and do nothing. Okay. What do you think will happen? What are the consequences of that? Good or bad? Sometimes we all need to stay in bed all day right now. I don't know. But if your kid stays in bed multiple days in a row, you got a different issue. But I like kids to set their own agenda. It doesn't matter how old they are, because then we know what's important to them in that day. I really want to get to this level on this video game. I really need to FaceTime with this person. I really need to, in our house right now as a parent, we have 18 Zoom calls with teachers happening a week, plus my job. There's a lot of computer time happening. Who do you need to connect with today is a great question in our house, and how can I help make that happen? Sometimes it's finding a quiet corner or whatever. But I like kids to set their own expectations for the day rather than me just telling them what to do.
That's great. I'm going to remind those that are attending that if you have a question, you can pop it in the question and answer or the chat box, and we'll see those. We did have a question pop in. It said, is it okay to have some boundaries around what you are hoping to get done today? Like, here are some suggestions. Here are some suggestions of expectations. What do you want to do today?
For me, in working with teenagers, I reward the behavior, well, all kids, I reward the behavior I like to see. So when they get all their things done that they need to get done in the day, there's a reward for that. And that reward right now might be, we'll sit down and we'll play Settlers of Catan. It might be, you know, like tomorrow we're going to go on a long bike ride because they have all gotten their schoolwork done early. It might be that they can't play a video game or watch a movie or get on Netflix until their stuff is done, but I reward the behavior I like to see. So when you're done with this, then you can do the thing that you really want to do. But I'm a big fan of rewarding positive behavior rather than looking for negative behavior.
I think, yeah, is it okay to have boundaries around what we're going to do today? I feel like, yes, of course, especially if there's something that has to get done. Again, creating a schedule with your child is really important because, like Sara was kind of saying, what do they want to do in the day and how can you be helpful? I think kids are really insightful, so I think they do know how to get things done, but they also get distracted sometimes. So as a parent, you can help them set their own personal boundaries. Like, I'm always really big on teaching people how to set their own personal boundary. So little kids learning how to do that, I think it's helpful through adulthood, right? So not expecting somebody to not come across the boundary that they set, but setting their own boundary that they don't go across, right? So having kids say, you know, okay, today I want to get this assignment done. It's going to take me all day, but I'm always going to come back to it. That's my personal boundary. So helping kids set that is important, probably more important than a parent setting a boundary for them without them having buy-in to it, right? Because they do need some ownership. But I definitely think it's okay to have boundaries right now around what they want to do, for sure.
So like, just following up on that, could it be like you ask your child, hey, what do you need to get done today? They say, I need to beat this video game. Great, right? Validate that you want to beat the video game today. Is it okay at that point, or would it be a good thing at that point to say, what do you want to get done today in school?
Mm-hmm.
Then to kind of help zone them in to a couple other things, and then use that big thing they want as kind of that reward maybe, but to help them see like, oh, life has a bunch of areas and I have to actually do stuff in all of these areas of my life. I think that could be a way to kind of help guide. Like, obviously what's most important to them is probably going to be the first thing that comes out, right? So if it's a video game or a Skype call or, you know, hanging out with friends, whatever that is, and then they might need to be reminded that, hey, you have these other priorities too that are important. So
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where that gets back into that question again, parents trying to figure out, is it okay? Anything is, I mean, as parents, that's kind of our job, right? To guide kids. But then again, we need them to be able to guide themselves. So that's why if they say, yeah, I want to play this video game today, that's my goal of the day. Okay, well, you know, there's other things that you have to do. Right? Like, so, and I know you think you have to play that video game and you're probably right. So how do we get your wants and what you feel like you have to do involved in what you really actually have to do to go to the next grade? And I know kids don't think anything about going to the next grade because we talked about that, I think, on Monday. It's not even real anymore to them. So they may think this game is here, it's tangible, you know, so helping them see that is important, but they need those skills. After we go through this, kids still need to know how to set personal boundaries for their time. And so parents can guide them through that.
That's great. That's great. All right. Any questions from our attendees? Now would be a great time. We've got one more on my list that we're going to talk through. But if you have questions, now's a great time for you guys to pop them in there. We'd love to answer them. The last question came actually from our staff team at Youth for Christ. We were on a phone call yesterday, and they just said, it seems like there's been a lot of talk on boundaries. And so, yeah, so they were just curious what types of boundaries could there be? It's a very broad kind of question and conversation. So we can go, we don't need to hone in on this, but I think Maybe for some people, boundaries are a newer thing or not something they're familiar with setting. And so when they hear us talking about boundaries, that could be a really new concept. Or maybe they've only done it in certain areas of their life. And so thinking about, I need boundaries in all of these areas. So maybe could you guys talk for a few minutes just on boundaries and define what those are? And I know it's a really, like I said, I know it's a really big topic, but maybe just give us your snapshot of what that looks like.
Well, the interesting thing about kids, particularly adolescents, is their boundaries are drastically different than a parent's boundaries. I mean, if you watch kids interact with other kids, they say things, they sit on each other's laps, they're touching each other, there's no physical boundaries, they're sharing schoolwork, so there's no work boundaries. They are on a phone while they're doing homework, so there's really no boundary for task or activity. They're listening to music and singing a different song at the same time. Their boundaries look very, very different. And so if you're a really defined person, if you're a type A person that likes work at work and home at home, and date night always happens on the same night, all those kind of things, when you're forced to live with kids, boundaries get all blurry all the time. And I think right now for us, we have to be flexible because this is our current reality, but this isn't reality. And so whatever boundaries you might have out in the regular world that you live in, they probably don't really flesh out. But when you get a check in your soul as a parent and say, that's not right, my kid shouldn't barge into the bathroom when I'm using the bathroom, then that's a great opportunity to set a boundary. My kids shouldn't be screaming and fighting and attacking each other. So there's a physical boundary that you need to address. My kids shouldn't be sneaking out at night, regardless of whether there's a stay-at-home order or not. That's a boundary. So when you get that tweak as a parent and say, I don't think that's right, say it out loud first, and then kind of go, okay, well, now how do I move toward that in a way that's going to bring me and my kid closer together? But the boundaries that we might have really adhered to, if you're a boundary person, probably are being crossed left and right now. And if you're a fluid person, you're probably finding you might need to set some to maintain your own sanity. So I think it has more to do with, as an adult, what is really tweaking you out. And as I talk with parents, the physicality of their kids is one that pops up right now in my office. Kids getting really physical with each other because they're bored, because they don't have adventure, because they're frustrated, because they're left alone too long, or whatever it is. So that would be an indication, okay, we need to set a boundary. And the boundary probably isn't, we don't attack each other. The boundary is probably more, we need to find more ways to be physical outside of the house. But I feel like for me, that's a much bigger issue. We could talk about that for hours, but it depends. I think really it comes down to, as a parent, I'm uncomfortable with this behavior. What do I need to do to correct the behavior? If you go back to desirable behavior, then we need to make moves toward desirable behavior.
That's great.
I think, Phil, to answer that, the people who ask it have to, again, define what boundary is, like what they think it is, and maybe even look it up, or just go with words that are familiar to them. So sometimes boundaries is interchangeable with like rules, the word rule, or limits or things like that. And so I feel like people are trying to figure out what is happening in their home, and so they might use a different word. So I would encourage everybody who's asking, like, what's a boundary, like what does that mean, start to think about other ways that they've maybe restricted movement or behavior that could be considered a boundary. They just are not calling it that. There are, I think, verbal boundaries is what I was kind of talking about earlier. So being in closed spaces with people for so long causes people to say things. Maybe they feel it. They probably feel what they're saying. But there should probably be a verbal boundary for the ways that we're interacting with each other right now. So being expressive with our words, but being kind as we're expressing. So putting some type of limitation on the ways that you maybe are speaking to each other. I think a lot, I notice this on social media. So kids will have this issue with like cyberbullying, right? Like we'll talk to kids about, make sure you share when somebody says something to you. So that's talking about boundaries or limits or rules. So in the house, when we're with people, we've all of a sudden taken the language that we were using in those chat rooms and Facebook and social media and saying it out loud, which is causing people to really feel uneasy. And so that's a verbal boundary that's being crossed, and people probably don't even know that they're doing it. And I think that's what's causing a lot of tension. So again, just watching the way we speak to each other in these closed spaces where we can't go anywhere. And we're already over the top emotional. We don't have space, so our spatial boundaries are being restricted. Just being very careful and mindful of how we're talking to one another. But again, allow people to just kind of define what they think a boundary is. It's not a word that I was familiar with either growing up. I don't think I ever heard anybody at my house say the word boundary, but I did understand rules, regulations, limits, things like that. So yeah, go back in yourself, define what you think it is, and then just kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right. Anything else, ladies, that you want to add before we end this time?
I just want to tell parents, you can do this. You can do this. You can figure out how to get the behavior that you want out of your kids, and you can love it. You can do this. Don't let whatever social media is telling you you're failing at define who you are as a parent. That you are created as the perfect parent for your kid. So grow in that and stop comparing yourself to anything that anybody else posts about their parenting. You got this. You can do it.
Yeah, I think so. Just those words, reminding each other of that. So let's support one another, and use your resources, be creative. We've talked a lot about things that people have lost through this, but what about the people who never even had it, right? So now they're kind of sitting at home trying to figure out too what to do. So recognize wherever you're at economically, socially, that you have what you need. And we all have what we need, and that we can just grow from this experience to live a better day, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, ladies, for being a part of this and taking your time to share this with us. And thank you for everybody who listened. If you are watching this and you didn't see our Monday night conversation, if you go to westsoundyfc.org/parent, you can watch the Monday night recording and find all the tools and resources that we talked about on that webinar on that website there for you. And as I said at the beginning, on Monday we have a panel of educators coming, school counselors, a couple of teachers, and some school administration. So they're excited to come and share with you guys how you can support your kids through the educational system that is being completely turned upside down right now. And they're happy to share that. We're happy to bring that to you guys too. So look forward to seeing you guys on Monday. And if you have questions, feel free to email us. We'll respond to those as quick as we can. But thank you so much for coming, and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.